You probably remember the headlines about the infamous 2012 prophecy and the end of the world. But that whole story was based on a complete misunderstanding of who the ancient Maya really were. The truth is, their real story, their incredible achievements, and their actual mysterious collapse is far more fascinating than any modern myth. In this deep dive documentary, we are going to go beyond the 2012 hype to uncover that true story. Together, we will walk the silent plazas of their magnificent jungle cities, from the towering temples of Tikal to the serpent pyramid of Chichen Itza. We will explore the brilliant minds of their astronomers and understand how they created the most accurate and complex calendar in the ancient world. We'll delve into their dark and powerful mythology, a world of sacred caves, blood offerings, and a ritual ball game where the stakes were often life and death. And finally, we will confront the greatest and very real Maya mystery. Why, at the peak of their power, they abandoned their great cities, leaving them to be swallowed by the jungle for 1,000 years. And we'll do it all in our signature style, a calm, atmospheric, and detailed story designed to capture your imagination while helping you to relax, learn, and drift off to a deep and restful sleep. So, find a comfortable place, quiet your mind, and get ready to discover the lost world of the Maya. Chapter 1. The Jungle Kingdom. To understand the Maya, we must first understand their world. Unlike the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, which rose along the banks of single mighty rivers in open landscapes, the Maya civilization was born in a far more challenging environment, the dense, humid, and sprawling lowland rainforests of Mesoamerica. This was a world of immense biodiversity, but also one of thin soil, intense seasonal rains, and a thick jungle canopy that could swallow a city whole. It was here, not in a single, unified empire, but in a scattered and competitive landscape of rival city-states, that the Maya would build their cosmic kingdoms. Their story begins in what archaeologists call the pre-classic period, stretching back to around 2000 BC. The earliest Maya were a people of small, scattered farming villages, cultivating the sacred trinity of Mesoamerican life: maize, beans, and squash. They were influenced by the older and more mysterious mother culture of the region, the Olmec. But soon, the Maya began to develop their own unique and brilliant traditions. They began to build the first great ceremonial platforms, to experiment with their own forms of writing, and to lay the astronomical foundations for their complex calendar. In the late pre-classic, long before the famous cities of the Golden Age, the Maya built some of their largest and most massive cities in the Mirador Basin of northern Guatemala. Here, in cities like El Mirador, they constructed colossal pyramids that rival those of Egypt in sheer volume. The Great La Danta Pyramid, hidden in the jungle, is not as tall as the Great Pyramid of Giza, but with its massive platform base, it is one of the largest pyramids in the entire world. This early period shows that the ambition to build on a monumental scale was a core part of the Maya spirit from the very beginning. It was during the Classic period, from around 250 to 900 AD, that the Maya civilization reached its dazzling peak. This was the golden age of the great jungle cities, a network of powerful and competing kingdoms whose names still echo with a sense of mystery and grandeur: Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan. These were not just cities, they were cosmic diagrams, their temples and plazas aligned with the movements of the sun, the stars, and the planets. At the heart of each city-state was the divine king, the Kuhul Ajau, or Holy Lord. The Maya king was not just a political or military leader, he was a shaman, a divine being who served as the crucial intermediary between the mortal world of his subjects and the supernatural realm of the gods. His most sacred and important duty was to perform the rituals that maintained this connection. And the most potent of all these rituals was the act of royal bloodletting. The Maya believed that blood was a sacred substance, the very essence of life, and that the blood of a king was the most potent of all. In great public ceremonies, the king would pierce his own tongue, ears, or other parts of his body with a sharp obsidian blade or a stingray spine, allowing his blood to flow onto pieces of bark paper, which would then be burned as an offering. The queen would perform similar acts, often pulling a thorny rope through her tongue. They believed that the smoke from this burning, blood-soaked paper would open a portal, a vision serpent, from which their divine ancestors and the gods themselves could emerge to communicate with them. It was a painful and deeply personal sacrifice, a king giving his own life force to nourish the gods and ensure the continued stability of the cosmos. Warfare between the city-states was constant, but it was also highly ritualized. The goal was often not to conquer and occupy an enemy city, but to capture a rival king or high-ranking nobles. These elite captives would then be taken back to the victorious city, where they would be publicly displayed, humiliated, and eventually sacrificed in a great ceremony, their blood offered to the victorious city's patron gods. But the true genius of the Maya was in the world of the mind. They developed the most sophisticated and complete writing system in the ancient Americas. Their hieroglyphic script was a beautiful and complex system of over 800 signs, a mix of phonetic symbols and logograms that represented whole words. They wrote on everything. They carved the histories of their kings onto tall stone monuments called stelae. They wrote in their temples, on their pottery, and in magnificent folding books made from the bark of the fig tree called codices. Tragically, the Spanish, in their religious zeal, burned almost all of these books, and only 4 are known to have survived. It was this mastery of writing and mathematics that allowed them to develop their most famous intellectual achievement, their calendar system. The Maya did not have one calendar, but a complex and interlocking series of several. The 2 most important were the Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred calendar used for divination, and the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar used for agriculture. These 2 calendars would run side by side, creating a grand cycle of 52 years, at the end of which a great ceremony would be held. But for tracking deep time, they used the long count. This was a linear, astronomical calendar that counted the number of days that had passed since a mythical creation date, which corresponds to the year 3114 BC. It was this calendar that famously ended a major cycle on December 21st, 2012, an event that was never seen by the Maya as an apocalypse, but simply as the turning of a great cosmic page, the beginning of a new age. To manage this complex system, their mathematicians developed a sophisticated base 20, or vigesimal, number system. And most remarkably, they independently developed and used the concept of 0. This was an incredible intellectual leap that allowed them to perform complex calculations and to record vast spans of time with perfect accuracy. And so, the classic period Maya were a civilization of profound contrasts. They were brilliant astronomers who could predict eclipses with stunning precision, and yet they believed they had to offer their own blood to keep the universe in balance. They were master architects who built cities that were in perfect harmony with the cosmos, and yet they were engaged in constant, ritualized warfare with their neighbors. It was a world of incredible intellectual achievement and deep, abiding faith. A golden age of jungle kingdoms that, for centuries, seemed destined to last forever. Chapter 2. The Cosmic Clock. The Maya were not just kings, warriors, and builders. They were, above all else, keepers of time. They were philosopher astronomers, obsessed with the intricate and repeating cycles of the cosmos. Their universe was not a random place, but a vast and complex clockwork, created and governed by the gods. To understand the movements of the stars was to understand the will of the gods themselves, and to record these movements was a sacred duty. This profound intellectual and spiritual quest gave birth to the greatest achievements of the Maya mind: a beautiful and complex writing system, an elegant system of mathematics, and the most sophisticated calendar ever developed in the ancient world. Let us first look at their words. The Maya developed the only true, fully functional writing system in the ancient Americas. It was a beautiful and incredibly expressive script, composed of over 800 unique signs or hieroglyphs. It was not a simple alphabet, but a complex logosyllabic system. This meant that some glyphs were logograms, beautiful artistic pictures that represented a whole word. A stylized jaguar head for the word Jaguar, for example. Other glyphs were phonetic, representing the sound of a single syllable, like ba, ka, or la. The genius of their system was its flexibility. A scribe could write the same word in multiple ways. They could use a single logogram, or they could spell the word out phonetically using several syllable glyphs. They would often choose the method that was most aesthetically pleasing, turning every sentence into a work of art. The glyphs themselves were arranged in paired columns, meant to be read from left to right and top to bottom. They wrote on everything. On tall, magnificent stone monuments called stelae, they would record the birth, the accession, and the military victories of their divine kings. They covered the walls, stairways, and wooden lintels of their temples with the stories of their gods and their royal lineage. But their most precious knowledge was kept in magnificent folding books called codices. These were made from the bark of the fig tree, which was pounded into a long sheet, coated with a fine layer of plaster, and then folded like a screen or an accordion. In these books, their scribes recorded their astronomical data, their prophecies, their religious rituals, and their deep history. Tragically, in the 16th century, the Spanish conquistadors, believing these books to be the work of the devil, systematically burned almost all of them. Out of the thousands of codices that must have existed, only 4 are known to have survived. These 4 priceless, ghostly survivors are our most direct window into the lost world of the Maya mind. For centuries, the script was a complete mystery. But in the mid-20th century, a great intellectual breakthrough was made when scholars finally understood that the glyphs were not just pictures, but represented a sophisticated phonetic system. Today, we can read a large portion of the Maya script, and the silent stones and pages have begun to speak again, telling us the stories of their kings, their wars, and their cosmos. To manage the vast spans of time they were observing, the Maya developed a simple but brilliant system of mathematics. It was a vigesimal or base 20 system, likely derived from counting on both the fingers and the toes. They could write any number using just 3 symbols: a dot for the number 1, a horizontal bar for the number 5, and, most remarkably, a special symbol for the concept of 0, often represented as a stylized shell. The independent invention of 0 was an incredible intellectual achievement, a leap of abstract thought that only 1 or 2 other cultures in history have ever made. The concept of 0 allowed them to create a positional number system, just like ours, where the position of a number determines its value. With this simple, elegant system, the Maya could write numbers up into the hundreds of millions and perform the complex astronomical calculations needed to chart the heavens. And it was in this charting of the heavens that their obsession with time was born. The Maya did not see time as a single straight line, but as a series of great interlocking cyclical gears. Their calendar system was a fusion of these different cycles. The first and most important cycle was the Tzolk'in, the 260-day sacred calendar. It was a great divinatory tool, the spiritual heart of their calendar system. It was formed by the weaving together of 2 smaller cycles, a cycle of 20 named days, with names like Imix, water lily, Ik, wind, and Akbal, darkness, and a cycle of 13 numbers. Each day was a unique combination of a number and a name. For example, 4 Ahau, or 8 Eznab. This cycle of 260 days would repeat endlessly, and the day upon which a person was born would determine their personality and their destiny. It was a sacred almanac that governed every aspect of their life, from when to plant crops, to when to go to war. Running alongside this sacred calendar was the Hab, the 365-day vague year. This was their civil and agricultural calendar based on the cycle of the sun. It was composed of 18 months of 20 days each. This adds up to 360 days. The final 5 days of the year, known as the Wayeb, were considered a time of immense danger and bad luck. The portals between the mortal world and the underworld were believed to be open, and malevolent spirits could wander the earth. The Maya would spend these 5 days in a state of fasting and ritual, making offerings and staying in their homes, waiting for the dangerous period to pass and the new year to begin. These 2 calendars, the 260-day Tzolk'in and the 365-day Hab, would run in parallel. A specific date, a combination of both a Tzolk'in and a Hab position, would only repeat once every 52 years. This 52-year period, the calendar round, was a century to the Maya, and the end of each cycle was a time of great religious significance and renewal. But for tracking the great linear sweep of history, the Maya used their most famous and most misunderstood calendar of all, the long count. This was their absolute astronomical calendar, a great reckoning of time that placed events in a fixed chronology. It counted the total number of days that had passed since a mythical creation date, which corresponds to August 11th, 3114 BC. The long count was structured like their base 20-number system. A Kuin was 1 day. A Winal was 20 days. A ton was 360 days. A katun was 20 tons, or about 20 years. And the largest unit was the baktun, which was 20 katuns, or about 394 years. The date on a Maya stela would be given as a series of 5 numbers, recording the total number of baktuns, katuns, tuns, winals, and kins that had passed since the creation date. It was this long count calendar that led to the infamous 2012 prophecy. December 21st, 2012, simply happened to be the day that the 13th baktun since the Maya creation date came to an end. To the Maya, the number 13 was a sacred and important number. The end of the 13th baktun would have been seen as a monumental anniversary, the completion of a great world age, and a moment for immense celebration and renewal. It was never a prophecy of apocalypse or the end of the world, but simply the turning over of a great cosmic odometer. And so, the intellectual world of the Maya was one of stunning complexity and beauty. They saw the universe as a great divine text, and they believed that by mastering the languages of mathematics, astronomy, and writing, they could learn to read the will of the gods. Their cities were built as mirrors of the cosmos, and their kings were the divine timekeepers, whose sacred duty was to oversee the rituals that kept the great cyclical gears of the universe turning in perfect, harmonious order. Chapter 3: Gods, Myths, and the Sacred Ball Game. The Maya universe was a far more complex and layered place than our own. It was a great square house with a roof of 13 heavens and a floor of 9 underworlds. In the center of it all, connecting these realms, grew the great world tree, the Waka-chan, its roots deep in the darkness of the underworld and its branches reaching up to the highest celestial plane. And within this cosmic house lived a pantheon of powerful and often fearsome gods. To the Maya, the calendar and the stars were not just objects of scientific study. They were the living language of these gods, a way to understand their will and to participate in the great cyclical drama of the cosmos. The most complete and beautiful telling of their sacred story comes from a book known as the Popol Vuh, the Book of the People of the Quiche Maya. It is their epic of creation, a tale that begins, like so many others, in a great and silent darkness. In the beginning, there was only the calm sea and the empty sky. The creator gods, in their feathered serpent forms, lay hidden in the water. They thought and they meditated, and as they spoke, the world came into being. They created the earth, the mountains, the animals, but the gods were lonely. They desired beings who could speak their names, who could honor them and keep the days. And so, they attempted to create humanity. Their first attempt was a failure. They fashioned men from wet mud, but these creatures were mindless, clumsy, and could not speak. They were soft and dissolved in the water, so the gods destroyed them. For their second attempt, they carved men from wood. These beings could walk and talk and multiply, but they had no hearts, no minds, and no memory of their creators. They were empty and inflexible, and they did not honor the gods. So the gods resolved to destroy them as well. A great resinous flood was sent from the heavens, and the wooden men were hunted and smashed by their own tools and animals. The few who survived, the legends say, became the monkeys that now inhabit the trees of the jungle. The final and successful creation of humanity would only come after a great heroic struggle had taken place in the underworld. The central epic of the Popol Vuh is the story of the hero twins. a pair of brilliant and cunning young gods named Hunahpu and Xbalanque. Their story begins with their father and uncle, who were also twins and great players of the sacred ball game. The noise of their playing in the court above disturbed the lords of Xibalba, the grim and malevolent gods of the Maya underworld. The lords of death summoned the first set of twins to Xibalba, and, through a series of tricks and deceptions, defeated and sacrificed them. Years later, when Hunahpu and Xbalanque grew up and began to play the ball game themselves, they too were summoned to the dark realm of Xibalba to face the same fate. But these new twins were different. They were armed with a cleverness and a magic that the lords of death could not comprehend. Their journey through the underworld was a series of impossible trials, each one set in a different, terrifying house of torture. There was the House of Gloom, a place of absolute darkness. There was the House of Knives, filled with slashing, clattering obsidian blades. There was the House of Cold, the House of Jaguars, and the House of Fire. In their most famous trial, they were trapped in the House of Bats, a cave filled with monstrous screeching bats, one of which, in a moment of carelessness, decapitated Hunahpu. But his clever brother, Xbalanque, was able to fashion a new head for him from a squash, and, through their shared magic, they survived. Finally, after surviving every trap and outwitting every demon, the hero twins enacted their final, brilliant plan. They appeared before the lords of Xibalba, pretending to be poor, wandering magicians. They performed a series of dazzling tricks, culminating in their greatest feat. Xbalanque would sacrifice his own brother, Hunahpu, tearing out his heart, and then he would resurrect him, bringing him back to life completely unharmed. The lords of death were utterly astounded. They had never seen such a powerful magic. Filled with a greedy desire for this power, they began to clamor, "Do it to us, sacrifice us, and then bring us back to life." The hero twins obliged. One by one, they sacrificed the great lords of Xibalba. But they did not bring them back. Through their cunning, they had conquered the underworld, defeated death itself, and avenged their father. Their great deed done, the hero twins ascended into the heavens, and they were transformed. The brilliant Hunahpu became the sun, and his brother Xbalanque became the moon. With the underworld now subdued, the gods were finally ready for their last attempt at creation. They took yellow and white maize, ground it into a fine dough, and from this sacred substance, they fashioned the first true human beings. This myth was central to the Maya soul. It taught them that humanity was literally made from corn, the food that sustained them. And it taught them that the sun and the moon they saw in the sky were their own heroic ancestors who had conquered death to give them life. This great drama was not just a story. It was a ritual that was reenacted in every Maya city, in the great eye-shaped stone ball courts that were a feature of every ceremonial center. This was the game of pits. It was played with a solid, heavy rubber ball, which could weigh up to 9 pounds. Two teams of players, adorned in ceremonial gear, would face off. The goal was to keep the heavy ball in the air, using only their hips, their thighs, and their upper arms, and to try and score a point by passing it through a high vertical stone hoop set in the wall of the court. The game was incredibly difficult and athletic, but it was far more than a sport. It was a deeply religious ritual, a reenactment of the cosmic struggle between the hero twins and the lords of Xibalba. a battle between the forces of life and the forces of death. The ball represented the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the players were the divine heroes keeping the cosmos in motion. And the stakes of this ritual game were often absolute. The carved panels on many ball courts depict the grim conclusion of the game. The captain of the losing, or sometimes even the winning team, is shown being decapitated, his blood offered as a sacrifice to the gods, a repayment for the divine sacrifice that had created the world. The Maya worldview, then, was one defined by this great cosmic struggle. Their world was born from the failure and sacrifice of the gods, and it was kept in motion by the heroic deeds of the sun and the moon. And through their rituals, their blood offerings, and their sacred ball game, they believed they were not just passive observers, but active participants in this eternal, cyclical battle between the forces of creation and the dark lords of the underworld. Chapter 4. Children of the Maize. The stone monuments of the Maya tell a story of gods and divine kings, of great battles and celestial alignments. But this is the history of the 1%. The true story of the Maya civilization is the story of the millions of common people, the farmers and their families, the silent majority whose lives were not recorded on the great stone stelae, but were etched into the very soil of the jungle itself. To understand the Maya world, we must walk a day in their sandals. We must enter their homes, work their fields, and understand their profound connection to the sacred crop that was not just their food, but the very substance of their being: maize. Let us begin in a small clearing in the great Peten rainforest. Here, nestled among the giant trees, is a typical Maya household. It is not a house of stone, but a simple and ingenious structure, perfectly adapted to the jungle climate. The house, called Ana, is oval-shaped, its walls made of a sturdy framework of wood, packed with mud and woven vines in a technique called wattle and daub. The roof is high and steeply pitched, made from a thick, expertly layered thatch of palm fronds, which keeps the interior cool and completely dry, even during the most torrential tropical downpours. Inside, the home is a single large room with a floor of packed white earth. The space is dark and cool, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and cooking corn. There is very little furniture, perhaps a few low wooden benches, some beautifully crafted pottery for storing water and food, and simple reed mats laid on the floor for sleeping. At the very center of the home is the hearth, a small fire pit defined by 3 large stones. This was the sacred heart of the household, a mirror of the 3 stones the gods were said to have placed at the center of the universe at the moment of creation. The family unit was the core of all life, a close-knit group of parents, children, and often grandparents, all living and working together in a small compound of similar houses. The life of the Maya farmer was one of constant, rhythmic, and back-breaking labor, a life dictated not by a king's command, but by the great, powerful cycles of the jungle and the sky. Their method of farming was the milpa system, a form of slash-and-burn agriculture that they had perfected over thousands of years. In the dry season, a farmer would select a new patch of forest. With a stone axe, he would begin the arduous process of cutting down the trees and the thick undergrowth, leaving it all to dry under the hot sun. Then, just before the first rains of the wet season were due to arrive, he would set it on fire. The result was a great, controlled burn that would clear the land and, most importantly, leave behind a thick layer of nutrient-rich ash. This ash was the fertilizer that would give life to his crops. As the first rains began to fall, the farmer would walk through this new gray field, his milpa, with his primary tool, a simple, fire-hardened digging stick called a koe. With it, he would poke a hole in the ash-rich soil, drop in a few precious seeds, and cover it over with his foot. And the seeds he planted were almost always the sacred trinity of Mesoamerican life, the three sisters. First, he would plant the maize. As the corn stalks grew tall, he would then plant beans, which would use the stalks as a natural trellis to climb towards the sun. The beans, in turn, were a gift to the maize, as their roots would fix nitrogen in the soil, replenishing the nutrients the corn consumed. Finally, he would plant the broad-leafed squash around the base. The great leaves of the squash would spread out, shading the ground, which prevented weeds from growing and, crucially, kept the soil moist and cool. It was a perfect symbiotic system, a small, man-made ecosystem in the heart of the jungle. The daily life of a Maya man was the life of his milpa. He would wake before dawn and walk for miles to his fields. His day would be a constant struggle against the relentless encroachment of the jungle, a battle of weeding, protecting his young crops from pests and praying to the gods for the right balance of sun and rain. But it was the maize that was the center of his world. Maize was not just a food. According to their sacred book, the Popol Vuh, the gods had made the first true humans from a dough of yellow and white corn. To the Maya, maize was literally the flesh of their ancestors, the substance of their very being. It was a divine gift to be cultivated with a sense of sacred duty. While the men worked in the fields, the women were engaged in an equally arduous and even more time-consuming task back in the home. A woman's day was defined by the sound of the grinding stone, the metate, for 4 to 6 hours. Every single day, a Maya woman would kneel before this slab of volcanic stone. Using a stone roller called a mano, she would grind the dried maize kernels that had been soaked overnight in lime water, a process that unlocked their nutrients. Back and forth, her rhythmic, powerful movements would transform the hard kernels into a fine, soft dough called masa. It was exhausting, repetitive work, but it was the single most important task in the household. Without the masa, there was no food. From this sacred dough, she would prepare the family's meals. The most important of these was the waj, the flat, round corn tortilla, which was cooked on a hot clay griddle over the hearth and eaten with every meal. She would also use the masa to make tamales, stuffing them with beans or chili peppers and wrapping them in corn husks to be steamed over the fire. And she would make a thick, nourishing, and warm corn-based drink called atole, which was often the first meal of the day. A woman's work did not end at the grinding stone. She was also the master of the weaver's art, using a simple but effective backstrap loom, which she would tie to a post or a tree. She would spend countless hours spinning raw cotton into thread, and then weaving that thread into the beautiful, intricate textiles that were used for her family's clothing. The patterns she wove were not just decorative. They were a language of symbols that could identify her family, her village, and her place in the cosmos. And of course, she was the one who raised the children, who tended the small household garden of herbs and spices, and who looked after the family's few domestic animals, like the turkeys and the small hairless dogs they kept for food. The life of a Maya commoner was one of community and obligation. While most of their life was spent in their small family compound, the local market day was a time for social connection, a chance to trade any small surplus of their crops for necessities like salt, obsidian blades, or pottery. And they had a profound obligation to the Holy Lord who ruled their city-state. They were required to pay a portion of their harvest as tribute, and to provide their own labor for the construction of the great monuments. It was the collective labor of thousands of these ordinary farmers working for a portion of the year that raised the great pyramids and temples to the sky. This was not slavery, but a form of taxation, a sacred duty to the king who was their link to the gods. And so, the life of a Maya commoner was a life of quiet, cyclical, and unrelenting hard work. It was a life lived in a deep and intimate connection with the forest, with the seasons, and with the sacred corn that sustained them. For all the glory of the divine kings, for all the brilliance of the astronomers, it was the quiet, back-breaking, and repetitive labor of these millions of anonymous children of the Maize that formed the true and unseen foundation upon which the entire magnificent civilization of the Maya was built. Chapter 5. The Court of the Jaguar, King. From the simple single-room hut of the commoner, we now enter the sprawling, labyrinthine world of the Maya elite. The heart of every great Maya city was not a market, but a royal palace, the residence of the Kuhul Ajau, the Holy Lord, and his court of nobles, priests, scribes, and artisans. This was not merely a home, it was an administrative center, a sacred stage for ritual and the physical embodiment of the king's power. These palaces, like those at the great city of Palanque, were multi-storied structures of limestone, a maze of long, vaulted corridors, private living quarters, and open, sunlit courtyards where the business of the kingdom was conducted. The air here was thick with the sweet, pungent smell of burning copal incense. The walls were not bare stone, but were covered in vibrant, brightly painted stucco murals, depicting great historical battles, complex mythological scenes, and the portraits of the city's divine royal lineage. The doorways were spanned by massive stone lintels, intricately carved with hieroglyphs that proclaimed the name, the titles, and the great deeds of the king who resided within. This was a world designed to impress, to intimidate, and to constantly reinforce the sacred and unquestionable authority of the Holy Lord. The king himself was a figure who seemed to belong more to the world of the gods than to the world of men. His very body was a canvas for displaying his divine status. For the Maya elite, an ideal of beauty was practiced that to us seems strange and extreme. From the moment of birth, the head of a noble infant would be bound to a cradle board, gently but firmly pressing on the skull. Over months, this pressure would elongate the forehead, creating a graceful, sloping profile that was seen as a mark of supreme beauty and divinity. Many nobles would also have their teeth filed into points, or have small circular inlays of precious jade and pyrite embedded into their front teeth, a smile that would flash with green and gold. The king's daily attire was a breathtaking spectacle. He wore loincloths and cloaks made from the finest woven cotton, embroidered with intricate symbolic patterns. His most important garment was his headdress, a towering, magnificent creation of brilliant, iridescent green quetzal feathers. The quetzal was a sacred bird, and its long tail feathers were the most precious commodity in the Maya world, reserved for royalty alone. His body was adorned with a heavy weight of jade, the stone they valued more than any other. He wore massive, flared ear spools of jade, heavy necklaces of jade beads the size of plums, and a great belt hung with carved jade plaques that would clatter and chime with his every movement. He was a living work of art, a walking symbol of the wealth and power of his kingdom. A day in the life of the Holy Lord was a day of immense ritual and responsibility. In the morning, he would be awakened and dressed by a host of attendants. He would perform private rituals of prayer and offerings. Then he would hold court in a great audience chamber, seated upon a throne, which was often a stone bench carved in the shape of a reclining jaguar, the ultimate symbol of royal power and the night sun. Here, he would receive emissaries from other cities who would arrive bearing rich gifts and complex diplomatic messages. He would receive the tribute of goods and food from his own subject lords. And he would sit as the supreme judge, his verdict final in all important matters of law. The king was surrounded by a court of highly educated nobles, a class known as the Ahau. This included the priests who advised him on the sacred calendar, the scribes who recorded his history in the painted codices, the artists who decorated his palaces, and the generals who led his armies. And in the evenings, the stone halls of the palace would be filled with the sounds of music from drums, flutes, and rattles, as dancers performed for the court and a royal feast was served. The food of the elite was far more varied than that of the commoners, with tamales stuffed with turkey and other meats, rich sauces, and, of course, the sacred frothy and bitter chocolate drink, served in beautifully painted ceramic vessels. But all of this luxury, all of this power, came with a terrible and profound burden. The king's most important duty was not to govern or to command armies, but to be the chief shaman of his people. He was the living conduit, the portal between the earthly realm and the supernatural world of the gods and ancestors. And to open that portal, to maintain the covenant with the gods and ensure the continued survival of the cosmos, he had to make the most sacred and personal of all offerings, his own blood. The act of royal bloodletting was the central and most important ritual of Maya kingship. In great public ceremonies, often held on the top of the highest pyramid to mark a significant date in the calendar, the king and queen would perform this solemn act of self-sacrifice. The tools were sacred and terrifying. The razor-sharp spine of a stingray, a sliver of obsidian, or a ceremonial knife. The king would take the instrument and pierce his own tongue, his earlobes, or another part of his body. The queen would often pull a long rope, embedded with sharp thorns, through her own tongue. They would collect the flowing blood on strips of bark paper, which were then placed in a ceremonial vessel and set on fire. To the Maya, the smoke that rose from this burning, blood-soaked paper was not ordinary smoke. It was a divine essence, a spiritual substance that could part the veil between the worlds. As the crowd below watched, the king would enter a trance-like state, and from the rising smoke he would see a great vision serpent emerge. And from the mouth of this serpent, the face of a deified ancestor or a powerful god would appear to speak to the king and give him the wisdom and guidance needed to rule. This was not an act of self-harm, but the ultimate act of piety, It was a king, sacrificing his own life force, his own chulel, to nourish the gods who had given him life. It was a sacred debt, paid in blood, to maintain the cosmic order and to guarantee that the sun would continue to rise, that the rains would fall, and that the maize would grow. And so, the life of a Maya king was a profound paradox. It was a life of supreme privilege, surrounded by a level of art, luxury, and intellectual activity that was unmatched in his world. But it was also a life of immense and crushing responsibility. He was not just a man, he was a living symbol, the divine pillar that held up the sky. Every drought, every failed harvest, every lost battle was not a political or an environmental problem. It was a personal, spiritual failure. It was a sign that his sacrifices were not enough. The life of the Jaguar king was one of constant performance, a sacred and painful dance on the knife's edge between the world of mortals and the ever-present, ever-demanding world of the gods. Chapter 6. The Painted Body. In the ancient Maya world, art was not an object to be hung on a wall or admired in a gallery. It was a living, breathing part of their existence, woven into the fabric of everything from the grandest temple to the simplest pot, and even into the human form itself. To the Maya, the body was not a fixed, unchangeable vessel, but a work of art in progress, a raw material to be shaped, painted, and adorned to reflect a person's identity, their social status, and their sacred connection to the gods. Their standards of beauty were precise, profound, and to our modern eyes, often extreme. This process of shaping the body began at the moment of birth. For the Maya nobility, the ideal head shape was not the rounded form we are born with, but a gracefully elongated and sloping profile. They achieved this through the practice of cranial deformation. Just days after a child was born, their soft, pliable skull would be gently but firmly bound between two padded boards. Over a period of months, this constant, gentle pressure would reshape the growing bone, flattening the forehead and elongating the skull. This was not seen as a form of mutilation, but as an act of creation, a way of bestowing upon a child the divine and beautiful head shape of the gods, particularly the Maize god, whose elongated head was a symbol of a perfect ear of corn. It was a permanent and instantly recognizable sign of nobility. The Maya also considered a slight crossing of the eyes to be a mark of great beauty, a feature associated with the sun god Kinich Ahau. To induce this in their high-born children, a small bead or ball of resin would be hung from the infant's hair so that it dangled constantly between their eyes, forcing them to focus inward and eventually causing the eyes to permanently cross. Their artistry extended to the teeth. A beautiful smile was not one of simple white enamel, but one that was carved and jeweled. Elite Maya would undergo a painful procedure to have their front teeth filed into points, T-shapes, or other intricate patterns. The most prestigious form of dental decoration involved drilling small, shallow holes into the front of the teeth, and then embedding them with tiny, perfectly fitted inlays of precious, polished stones. Jade, the sacred green stone of life, was the most common, but they also used hematite, pyrite, and turquoise. Imagine a king or queen smiling, their teeth a glittering mosaic of green and gold. This was not dentistry for health, but for status and for beauty, a way of transforming a part of the body into a piece of personal jewelry. This tradition of artistry was not just confined to the body. The Maya were among the most brilliant painters and sculptors of the ancient world, and their art was a vibrant language that told the stories of their lives, their wars, and their gods. The most spectacular examples of this are the murals of Bonampak. In a small temple deep in the jungles of Chiapas, there are 3 rooms, their walls covered from floor to ceiling, in some of the most vivid and well-preserved paintings from the ancient Americas. To walk into these rooms is to step directly into the world of the Maya court. The first room depicts a great celebration. The king and his nobles are shown in their magnificent white cloaks and towering headdresses of quetzal feathers. Musicians play long trumpets, drums, and turtle shell rattles. The scene is one of preparation for a royal ceremony, the presentation of a young heir to the court. But the second room reveals the darker side of Maya life. It is a single, sprawling, and brutal battle scene. Warriors clash in chaotic combat. The king, in his intimidating Jaguar pelt armor, is shown grabbing a captive by the hair. In the lower panels, we see the aftermath. The captured enemy lords, stripped of their finery, their fingernails being torn out, pleading for their lives before the victorious king. The third room shows the triumphal celebration. Dancers in fantastic, otherworldly costumes perform on the steps of a pyramid. And the royal family, including the women of the court, are shown performing a solemn bloodletting ritual, piercing their tongues to offer their sacred blood to the gods in gratitude for their victory. The Bonampak murals were a revelation. They shattered the old image of the Maya as a peaceful, serene people and revealed a world of vibrant courtly life, brutal warfare, and solemn ritual. This same narrative genius can be seen on their pottery. Maya artists would use cylindrical ceramic vases as a canvas for incredibly fine and detailed paintings. Using a brush made from a single human hair, they would create complex scenes that wrap around the vessel. These were not just decorations. They were stories, often depicting scenes from their great creation myth, the Popol Vuh, showing the hero twins in their struggle against the lords of the underworld. They were a form of storytelling, a book made of clay that would often be placed in a tomb to accompany the deceased on their journey. The Maya were also masters of sculpture, both in stone and in stucco. Their great stone stelae were not just historical records, but portraits of their kings, carved in low relief with an incredible attention to detail, capturing every bead of a necklace and every feather of a headdress. And on the great pyramids that formed the heart of their cities, they would model colossal masks of their gods out of stucco. Great three-dimensional faces of the sun god or the maize god would flank the stairways, painted in brilliant reds, yellows, and greens, their huge, staring eyes gazing out over the plazas. And in their painting, the Maya used a color of their own invention, a pigment so unique and so durable that its formula remained a mystery to scientists for decades. It is known as Maya blue. It is a brilliant, vibrant, and almost unnatural shade of blue-green that has survived for over 1,000 years in the humid jungle without fading. We now know it was created through a sophisticated chemical process by bonding the organic dye of the indigo plant with a special heat-treated clay called palygorskite. This created an incredibly stable, inorganic pigment. The Maya used it to paint their murals, their pottery, and, in a final, sacred act, they would paint their human sacrificial victims with this brilliant blue, the color of the heavens and the sacred waters. And so, the world of the Maya was a world saturated with color and image. Art was their history, their religion, and their identity. It was a language spoken through the very shape of their bodies, through the clothes they wore, through the pots they drank from, and through the magnificent stone and stucco monuments that they left behind. Even in their silent, jungle-shrouded ruins, the vibrant artistry of the Maya remains a powerful and beautiful testament to a civilization that saw the entire world and the human body itself as a sacred canvas. Chapter 7. The Jade Road. We often imagine the great Maya cities as isolated kingdoms, emerald jewels set in the vast green sea of the jungle. But this is an illusion. The world of the Maya was a deeply interconnected one, linked by a complex and sprawling network of trade routes that functioned like the arteries and veins of their civilization. These were not just paths for moving goods, they were conduits for ideas, for influence, for political alliances, and for the shared culture that made them all Maya. This great network had no single name, but we can call it the Jade Road, after the most precious and sacred of all the commodities that traveled upon it. To understand the Maya economy, we must first understand what they valued. Theirs was not a world driven by gold or silver. Instead, their concept of wealth was rooted in a collection of rare, beautiful, and spiritually potent materials. The most valuable of all of these was jade. To the Maya, jade was not just a beautiful green stone, it was the physical embodiment of life, fertility, and the sacred essence of water and maize. It was called ku, or divinity. The stone was incredibly hard, more difficult to work than steel, yet Maya artisans, using only simple tools and abrasives, could carve it into breathtakingly intricate beads, plaques, and the famous death masks of their kings, like the magnificent mask of Pakal, the Great of Palenque. The only known source for this sacred stone was the Motagua River Valley in the highlands of Guatemala, hundreds of miles away from the great cities of the lowlands. The long and difficult journey of this heavy stone is a testament to its immense value. Next was obsidian, the volcanic glass. This was the steel of the ancient Americas. It could be flaked to create an edge of incredible razor-like sharpness. It was the material used for the blades of their sacrificial knives, their spearheads, and the personal bloodletting instruments of their kings. But it was not just a practical material. It was also a beautiful one, a black, glossy stone that seemed to drink the light. Like jade, its sources were specific and controlled, great volcanic deposits in the highlands, making it another crucial item of long-distance trade. Archaeologists can even analyze the chemical signature of an obsidian blade and trace it back to the exact volcano from which it was mined, allowing us to map the ancient trade routes with incredible precision. And then there were the goods that were as light as air, but just as precious. The most valuable of these were the tail feathers of the resplendent quetzal bird. These long, iridescent green feathers, shimmering like liquid jade, were the ultimate symbol of royalty and divinity. They were reserved exclusively for the magnificent, towering headdresses of the holy lords. The birds lived only in the high cloud forests, and so their feathers had to be carefully gathered and traded across the entire Maya world. Other exotic goods flowed through these networks as well. The thick, spotted pelts of the jaguar, the sacred animal of kings and the night sun, the bright red and orange shells of the spiny oyster, brought from the distant Pacific coast, and the precious salt from the coastal flats of the Yucatan, an essential commodity for both diet and the preservation of food. But how did these goods travel across a landscape of dense jungle, sprawling swamps, and rugged mountains in a civilization that had no horses, no oxen, and no wheel for transport? The answer is one of almost unimaginable human effort. All overland trade was carried on the backs of a professional class of human porters. Imagine a long line of men, each with a large basket, the cacaxtli, strapped to their back, held in place by a tumpline, a strap that passed across the forehead. Each man might carry a load of up to 50 pounds, and they would walk in a steady, rhythmic trot for dozens, sometimes hundreds, of miles along narrow jungle paths. It was a slow, arduous, but remarkably efficient system. For major routes between allied cities, the Maya built one of their most unique and impressive engineering marvels, the Sakbiob, or white roads. These were raised stone causeways, sometimes rising several feet above the jungle floor, to stay clear of seasonal floods. They were paved with a bright white limestone plaster that would have gleamed in the sun and been visible even under the light of the moon. These roads ran for miles in perfectly straight lines, cutting directly through the difficult terrain, a testament to the power of the kings who commissioned them and the armies of workers who built them. They were the physical arteries that connected the great urban hearts of the Maya world. But the most efficient way to move heavy goods was by water. The Maya were master canoeists. They built massive trading canoes, some carved from a single giant tree trunk that could be up to 50 feet long and carry dozens of men and a huge cargo. They used these canoes to navigate the network of rivers that crisscrossed the lowlands, and, most impressively, to engage in long-distance sea trade, hugging the coastline to circumnavigate the entire Yucatan Peninsula. The first and only European to witness this system in action was Christopher Columbus on his fourth voyage. He encountered a great Maya trading canoe off the coast of Honduras, as long as a galley, carrying a cargo of cacao, obsidian tools, and magnificent textiles, a fleeting glimpse of a vast, indigenous commercial world that was about to be forever changed. At the end of these long journeys, both by land and by sea, was the marketplace. Every Maya city had its market, a vibrant and bustling hub where the goods of the entire known world were brought to be traded. Here, the farmer from the local milpas would barter his surplus maize for a bag of salt. The potter would trade his vessels for a set of obsidian blades, and the great long-distance merchants, a distinct and often wealthy social class, would display their precious, exotic goods, the brilliant feathers, the sacred jade, and the cacao beans that served as a form of currency for all. And so, the Maya world, which can seem like a disconnected scattering of jungle cities, was in fact a single, vast, and interconnected economic web. This web of trade was the invisible force that held their civilization together. It was through these pathways that not only goods, but also ideas, art styles, and political influence traveled. A new style of pottery made in one city would soon appear in another. A new political alliance would open up new routes and bring new forms of wealth. This constant flow of goods and information created a shared Maya culture, a great international system that was vibrant, dynamic, and, as we shall see, ultimately fragile. The severing of these vital trade routes would become one of the key factors in the eventual collapse of the great cities. A sign that, when the web of connection is broken, the world it supports can fall apart. Chapter 8. Star Wars, for many years, the popular image of the Maya was that of a peaceful, serene people, a civilization of mystical astronomers and priests who lived in quiet contemplation of the cosmos. The archaeological discoveries of the 20th century shattered this illusion. The decipherment of their hieroglyphs and the study of their art revealed a very different truth. The Maya world was one of constant, intense, and highly sophisticated warfare. The great jungle cities were not peaceful sister states. They were fierce and bitter rivals, locked in a perpetual struggle for power, prestige, and, most importantly, for captives. But Maya warfare was not like the wars of other ancient civilizations. For much of their history, it was not primarily about conquering territory or annihilating enemy populations. It was a deeply ritualized and sacred duty, a cosmic performance with a very specific goal: the capture of high-ranking enemies. The battlefield was a stage, and on it, the Maya kings, dressed in the terrifying regalia of their gods, would prove their divine power. The Maya warrior was a formidable sight. The elite soldiers and the king himself would go into battle wearing magnificent and terrifying costumes, designed to intimidate their enemies and to channel the power of supernatural beings. They wore towering, elaborate headdresses of brilliant quetzal feathers, and their bodies were often adorned with the pelts of the jaguar, the most feared predator in the jungle. Their faces were painted, and their armor was a thick, quilted cotton vest that had been soaked in salt water to make it tough enough to stop the obsidian-tipped projectiles of their enemies. Their weapons were a deadly combination of ranged and close-quarters technology. They used the atlatl, the powerful spear thrower, to unleash a volley of razor-sharp obsidian darts from a distance. For the brutal face-to-face combat, they wielded long spears tipped with flint, and axe-like clubs studded with obsidian blades, weapons capable of inflicting terrible wounds. The ultimate goal of all this martial power was the capture of a rival noble, or, the greatest prize of all, the rival Kuhul Ajau, the Holy Lord himself. A captured king was not simply a prisoner of war. He was a living trophy, the ultimate symbol of the victor's triumph. He would be taken back to the victorious city and, for a time, would be publicly displayed, forced to participate in humiliating rituals, perhaps even to play a final doomed game of pits in his captor's ball court. Eventually, he would be sacrificed in a great public ceremony, his blood offered as a supreme gift to the gods. Every such victory and every such sacrifice was meticulously recorded in stone on the victor's stelae and temples. This system of ritualized warfare defined the political landscape of the classic period. The Maya world was dominated by a great Cold War between two colossal superpowers: the ancient and venerable city of Tikal in the south, and the mighty Snake Kingdom of Calakmul to the north. For centuries, these two great powers battled for supremacy, their conflict a complex game of shifting alliances, political maneuvering, and periodic, violent clashes. In the 6th century AD, this great rivalry reached a bloody climax. The Snake Kingdom of Calakmul formed a powerful alliance with other cities and launched a devastating war against its rival. In the year 562, Tikal was decisively defeated. Its king, Wakchan Kawil, was captured and sacrificed. The power of Tikal was broken. For the next 130 years, Tikal fell into a dark age known as the hiatus. No new monuments were built, no new temples were erected. The city's voice fell silent, and the snake kingdom of Calakmul reigned as the undisputed master of the Maya world. But the spirit of Tikal was not extinguished. In the 7th century, a new and powerful dynasty of kings arose, determined to restore the glory of their city. Under the great king Jasa Chankawil I, Tikal began to reassert its power, leading to a final, apocalyptic confrontation that would decide the fate of the Maya world. This was to be no ordinary battle. It was a star war. The Maya believed that the cosmos, and particularly the movements of the planet Venus, had a profound influence on warfare. Venus, as the morning star, was seen as a warlike and often malevolent deity. To launch a major war on the day of a specific, auspicious celestial event was to ensure that the battle would be fought not just by men, but by the gods themselves. In the year 736 AD, under just such a cosmic alignment, the armies of Tikal and Calakmul met for their final, decisive battle. It was not a long, drawn-out siege, but a single, brutal, face-to-face confrontation in the open field. The result was a total and overwhelming victory for Tikal. The army of the Snake Kingdom was shattered. Its king was captured. And in a final act of vengeance, the sacred effigy of Calakmul's patron god was seized and taken back to Tikal as the ultimate trophy. The power of the Snake Kingdom was broken forever. Tikal was once again the supreme power of the southern lowlands, and its great victory ushered in a final, glorious burst of cultural achievement and monumental construction. Great new temples, like the magnificent temple of the great Jaguar, rose into the sky, a testament to Tikal's reborn glory. And so, we see that Maya warfare was a complex and deeply sacred affair. It was a brutal ballet of political ambition and religious duty. The battlefield was a cosmic stage, where the fates of kings and kingdoms were decided not just by the strength of their arms, but by the carefully observed movements of the stars. It was a system of perpetual conflict, a necessary and sacred ritual that, for centuries, maintained the violent and precarious balance of their world. But this constant state of warfare, this endless cycle of raids and sacrifices, was also a deep and exhausting wound, a slow drain on the resources and the spirit of their civilization that would become a key factor in the great mystery we will explore in our final chapter, the collapse of their entire world. Chapter 9. The Great Collapse. In the dense green heart of the Mesoamerican jungle, there lie the silent ruins of dozens of magnificent cities. Their great limestone pyramids rise above the canopy like the skeletons of forgotten mountains. Their plazas, once bustling with kings, priests, and artisans, are now quiet, carpeted in moss, and reclaimed by the roots of giant ceiba trees. These are the lost cities of the classic Maya, and they are the haunting evidence of one of the most profound and mysterious societal collapses in all of human history. Beginning in the late 8th century AD, the Maya civilization in the southern lowlands, the very heartland of their culture, began to unravel. Over the course of the next century and a half, one by one, the great city-states that had flourished for centuries began to decline. The divine kings stopped erecting their magnificent stone monuments, the stelae that recorded their histories. Grand temples and palaces were left unfinished, the work of the masons stopping abruptly. And most mysteriously of all, the vast populations of these cities simply vanished, abandoning their homes and their sacred centers, and allowing the relentless jungle to swallow their entire world. This was not a single event, but a slow, creeping, and catastrophic decline. It was the end of the age of the divine kings. The evidence for this collapse is written in stone and in silence. For centuries, the Maya kings had obsessively recorded their histories and their connection to the cosmos on their stone stelae. We can read the dates of their births, their accessions to the throne, and their great victories. And then, city by city, the dates simply stop. In the great city of Palenque, the last recorded date is 799 AD. In Copan, it is 822 AD. In the mighty superpower of Tikal, the last stela was erected in the year 869 AD. After that, there is only silence. The archaeological evidence tells the same grim story. Skeletons from the late Classic period show increasing signs of malnutrition and disease. And in the final days of many cities, we see evidence of hastily built, desperate defensive fortifications, as if the people were trying to protect themselves from a new and terrifying threat. So what happened? What could cause one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth to so completely fall apart? For decades, scholars searched for a single, simple answer. But the truth, we now believe, is far more complex and far more tragic. There was no single cause, but a perfect storm of interconnected problems, a cascade of failures that brought this brilliant world to its knees. One of the key factors was the intensification of warfare. As we have seen, conflict between the Maya city-states was a constant, but for much of the Classic period, it was a highly ritualized affair, focused on capturing elite enemies for sacrifice. But in the final centuries of the era, the nature of this warfare changed. It became more brutal, more destructive, and more total. Great rivalries between superpowers, like the centuries-long struggle between Tikal and the Snake Kingdom of Calakmul, exhausted the entire region, draining resources and manpower. The goal was no longer just to capture a rival king, but to completely conquer and destroy a rival city. This endemic warfare created a state of constant instability and fear. At the same time, the Maya were beginning to face an environmental crisis of their own making. The populations of the great cities had grown to an unsustainable level, with some cities holding tens of thousands of people. To feed this population and to build their ever larger temples, the Maya began to clear the jungle at an alarming rate. They cut down vast swathes of forest to create more farmland for their maize crops, and they burned even more wood to heat limestone in order to create the lime plaster that covered their magnificent buildings. A single pyramid could require the deforestation of hundreds of acres. This widespread deforestation had a devastating effect. Without the forest canopy, the thin tropical soil began to erode, washing away into the rivers and making the farmland less productive. This likely led to a slow, creeping decline in crop yields, making it harder and harder to feed the massive population. The very success of their civilization had begun to undermine its own environmental foundation, and it was upon this already strained and fragile system that the final, killing blow fell: a catastrophic and prolonged change in the climate. By studying the sediment layers in lake beds and the growth patterns of stalagmites in caves, paleoclimatologists have discovered that the 9th and 10th centuries AD were a period of severe, recurring, and multi-decade droughts in the Maya heartland. For a civilization so utterly dependent on agriculture and the seasonal rains, this was an apocalypse. The rains they had prayed for, the rains that their divine kings were supposed to guarantee through their sacred rituals, simply stopped coming. The droughts would have led to widespread and repeated crop failures, to famine, and to a desperate scarcity of drinking water. Faced with starvation and a loss of faith in their kings, who could no longer make the rains come, the social contract that held their society together was broken. The result was a slow and agonizing disintegration. The people likely began to abandon the great urban centers, melting back into the jungle in smaller groups, searching for what little water and food they could find. The divine kings, their authority shattered, were overthrown. The sacred rituals were abandoned, and the great cities, once the vibrant hearts of the Maya cosmos, were left empty. Slowly, silently, the jungle returned. The roots of the great ceiba and mahogany trees pushed through the stone floors of the plazas. Vines crept up the sides of the great pyramids, pulling apart the stone blocks. The roar of the howler monkey replaced the voices of the kings and the priests. The cities were reclaimed by nature, their memory lost for 1,000 years. But it is crucial to remember that the Maya people did not vanish. What collapsed was their political system in the southern lowlands. They migrated. Their population centers shifted to the northern Yucatan Peninsula, where cities like Chichen Itza and Uxmal would continue to thrive for centuries, and to the highlands of Guatemala. The Maya people adapted, their culture evolved, and they survived, continuing to live in their ancestral lands to this very day. And so, the mystery of the Great Collapse is a profound and timeless cautionary tale. It is the story of a brilliant civilization that was brought down by a perfect storm of its own making and by the unforgiving power of nature. It is a story of endemic warfare, of overpopulation, of self-inflicted environmental damage, and of a catastrophic climate change. The silent, vine-covered ruins of Tikal and Palenque are a haunting testament to the fact that even the most advanced and cosmically attuned societies are not immune to the consequences of their own actions, and that no civilization, no matter how glorious, is guaranteed to last forever.